Okay. Let's get to it. Okay. And there we go. Welcome everybody to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky and I'm going to be making a painting with you today. Maybe even two paintings depending on how quickly we go here. So maybe just off the top I just wanted to put on my poppy here because, excuse the microphone crunching and moving here. I wanted to put a poppy on. Poppy is a Canadian way. I have no idea if it's just a Canadian thing, but I know in Canada it's something we do here to acknowledge and remember our men and women who have fought abroad or I guess potentially here in Canada. And I just thought I would make a quick mention of my grandfather, Alan Cornell, who served in World War II. He was a veteran of the Battle of the Atlantic, and this is a photograph of him in 1942, and he served on a minesweeper in the Mediterranean. And very proud of my grandfather for his service. My uncle, his son, was also in the military for many years, and his son, my cousin, is also in the Canadian Forces as well. So tomorrow's November 11th. Is it November 11th tomorrow already? What day are we? Yeah. So yeah, that's Remembrance Day tomorrow. Since we won't have a class tomorrow, I thought I would kind of squeeze this in right here because it's something that means a lot to me and a lot of other Canadians as well. Regardless of how you feel about war or the military, the fact is we've had veterans out there who have fought and sacrificed their lives for us, and I'm super grateful for it. I had an opportunity to participate in the War Artist program and was embedded with the Royal Canadian Air Force a few different times. Once I got to go up to the North Pole, like the North Pole. I think we mentioned this before, and I'm the first person to make paintings at the North Pole. And then a year later, I got to fly in a fighter jet plane and go faster than the speed of sound while I was making landscape drawings. So I'm grateful for those opportunities that were provided to me. So anyway, we will move on here. Today what we're going to be doing is we are going to be making a painting by one of, again, these are all my favorite artists. So when I say my favorite artists, these are my favorite artists. But they're also artists that I think, I try to find artists that you guys will also know and maybe have seen a little bit about because it's kind of cool to replicate an artist that you've heard of before, and to kind of show you how relatively accessible it is to do some of this this work. So the artist that we're looking at, his name is Keith Haring. Keith Haring was a New York-based artist and who's primarily famous for the stuff that he did in the 1980s. He lived a short life, died in 1990 of AIDS-related causes. But during that short period of life, how old was he? He was 31 when he died. He created a ton of artwork. He's mostly famous for, let me see, I'm going to enlarge. These drawings that he made, well, I guess these aren't them, but he made a lot of drawings on the subway in New York, actually literally drawing with chalk on the walls of or not the walls of the subway in New York at the time. They would have these areas where you could post posters, where they're advertisements, and when they were torn down, they'd be these blank black surfaces, and it was perfect because you could just draw with chalk. And if the police came and stopped him and tried to arrest him for graffiti or for defacing public property, all he had to do was just wipe it with his hand and it would disappear, right? So I actually think that that is a really great, non-destructive way of altering the landscape you know, actually spraying paint on walls can be really, unless it's done really, really well, is really ugly, right? And often people are just writing their names on it. One of the things that was great about Keith Haring, see if there's more artwork down here, a lot of text, is the images that he created, right? They really got people talking, because instead of just somebody scrawling their name on there or some kind of overt political commentary or text, he was using these images of these characters who were jumping around and doing all sorts of kind of shenanigans. All this kind of text here. Very few images. Anyway, so here's some of his artwork. You'll see a couple of the images. This is what we're going to paint today, the Radiant Child. And if we have a little bit more time, I'd like to try doing this one as well. But you see there's tons and tons of different kinds. You know, some of this work is super detailed and ornate, right? Like some of this, he also is very famous. Oh, cool, I found an image of it. Nice, quick here. Let's see if this opens up. He's also famous for a brief time he had a shop in New York City called the Pop Shop. Let me see if, and let's just zoom into this here. And in the Pop Shop, he would sell his, you know, t-shirts and skateboards and stickers and stuff. But you can also see that he completely covered the place from floor to ceiling with his artwork. I think it's just super cool. That's something that, you know, I'd really admire is artists who are that kind of business savvy to have their own store, as opposed to showing their work in galleries, which of course he did as well. Okay, so to get started, what we're going to do is we're going to get a couple of canvases ready to paint on. I've talked in the past about using some gesso on your canvases. So let's get out my bag of tricks here. So this canvas here, I've applied a little bit of gesso to. Maybe let's get a different view. So I've applied gesso to this. This is a regular acrylic-based gesso. There is obviously oil-based gesso. If you're doing a lot of oil paints, that would be a good investment. And so I've painted that on here, and I let it dry. And usually when I'm applying gesso, I also make a little note to myself. Any kind of alterations I do to the canvas, like this is one coat of gesso. And then I take, there's lots of different ways to do this. Here's just like a coaster. You can wrap the coaster in something. And there's a little bit of the newspaper that was kind of hanging off the edge. Just take care of that. Okay. So this is now a much smoother surface. You can also see that after sanding it, there is a little bit of this, you know, dust that comes off, right? And that dust, we want to try to get rid of as much of it as possible. So I just realized I am hinged into here and I forgot to get my water. So I might have to take my microphone off here and walk to the sink in a second. Maybe before I do that, I'm just gonna get rid of. You should do this outside. In an ideal world, you would do this outside so that you don't get dust all over your room. And maybe that's why I had technical difficulties last week, because I've been, you know, was sanding in here. What I want to do, however, is just for some people that don't have acrylic gesso, I thought I would just try using some regular white acrylic paint on the surface just to see how well that works. And this will probably dry maybe a little faster than the gesso. And so some people would say, well, okay, why then would we want to use gesso when we could use white paint? The difference between white paint is this acrylic has pigment and binder, an acrylic medium. And so essentially, this is a medium, acrylic medium, and this here is like a clear fluid. And it's a lot like your Elmer's glue, like white glue, like house glue that you would glue furniture together, right? And so this clear medium has a powdered pigment, in this case white, mixed into it. Acrylic gesso, on the other hand, has medium in it, and instead of white paint, it has kind of like a plaster dust inside of it. And what's great about that plaster dust is it gets into the weave of the canvas. Now, of course, our regular white paint is going to do a satisfactory job of doing it, but one of the qualities of acrylic paint is that it will self-level, right? And it's going to kind of, it'll do a pretty good job, but this is not its intended purpose. You see, I've just squeezed the paint directly onto the surface here. A generous amount, just so that I can really get it to fill in as many kind of the little valleys here in the weave of the canvas. Another little difference between just using paint to fill in and to prime a canvas as opposed to gesso is that really, acrylic paint itself is not really intended to be sanded, and so it may, it may discolor a little bit, and it may kind of not, you might end up going through a little bit more sandpaper because the sandpaper itself might get kind of gunked up a little bit. But this is sort of the poor woman's solution to gessoing your canvas. So I thought I'd just prime this. This will be for the second painting I make tonight, because this will give it a nice little bit of time to dry. Okay, so some medium. I'm going to talk a little bit about mediums here. Let me see, I actually get my paints out while I'm right here. Rags should I need them. I have them now. And yeah, give me 1 second. I'm going to unplug my microphone. Okay, so hopefully I didn't, I muted it just in time so you didn't hear any loud crackling while I was taking my microphone off. Okay, just going to clean this brush really quickly. Oops, and I got a little bit of water on the surface which is not a problem. It's going to potentially change things slightly here, cause the paint to disperse a little bit because it's wet. But this is just my initial underlayer here, my underpainting. So even though it's a little bit sloppy, it's not the end of the world. Okay. So let's find a place for this. We'll get our palette set up. And I've got paint all over the surface here, so I try to, when I'm painting, do a little bit of cleanup as I go. And these sort of things, like the paint here, I'm not even really necessarily wiping the paint away, just kind of brushing it and spreading it out, because that's going to help it to dry a little bit faster. And the other thing too, if I've got paint kind of splashed all over the place, wiping it up or kind of helping it dry a little faster is helpful, because, you know, if I'm moving paintings, canvases around, and then I get some paint on here, and then I put it over here, or put it on top, and then all of a sudden, that's how that paint starts to spread all around your studio. I'm also just going to give this surface just a little bit of a wipe, just a little bit of water on there to get rid of any dust. I felt it was still a little rough here. Okay, beautiful. So we're going to now look at the Radiant Baby image by Keith Haring here. Wow, look at all the comments in the chat here. I haven't had a chance to look at all of these here, so I'll give me a moment and I will do so. Oh, that's kind of a low res. Let's find ones bigger, higher. Okay. So here's our image. I wonder if I can get it a little bit bigger. Will it? I mean, we'll clip a little bit off the edges, but it's nice to see it a little bit bigger. Now, he died in 1990, but I think he created so much artwork that I'm not sure why this is 1993 when this image came out. Or this is also my own label here, so I could have mislabeled it. But it's also quite possible that they were just generating so many prints and things after he died. And if you probably recognize Keith Haring's work, because his art has been licensed and shown on all sorts of different kinds of T-shirts and skateboards, and you see it all the time. I think I could be wrong, but it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of the funds that the profits from the sale of his artwork go towards AIDS research, because that became a really big cause in his life towards the end there. Okay, so in the chat there, I did see people talking about how cold it is across. A lot of people are in Canada, and people talking about the snow in Ontario and Calgary. In Quebec. So winter is here. Winter is upon us, folks. So what a better way to spend your winter than to be making some art, making some paintings, right? Since you can't go outside, let's turn that energy towards making some really beautiful pictures. And by the time summer comes out, you're going to have all these great skills, and you'll be able to go outside and do some landscape painting, plein air painting, painting in the plain, in the air, in the open air. So, okay, let's work on this image here. Where's our, okay. So I'm going to try drawing this picture onto this surface. Now, I know some of you look at it and feel already maybe a little bit overwhelmed that this could be a complex image. So let's break it down and we'll simplify it, okay? So right in the middle, here's kind of the center of this picture. So let's divide our picture in half. Going to draw a line through the middle and a line through the top. You can see there's some slight ridges here from the gesso. If I really wanted, I could sand it down and make it a really super smooth surface, but even just that one first coat of gesso is really going to help. Anyway, So in the middle here, this is going to be the baby. We're going to break this down into a shape. So let's put this kind of sausage shape right in the middle. Okay. And then from here, let's draw another one for a leg. And then let's draw another one for a back leg. And let's do another one for a foot. And we'll have another foot back here. Again, we're going to paint over everything here, so we don't have to worry about making it absolutely perfect. Next thing we're going to do is let's do another, we'll draw kind of like a rectangle here, and then put a little triangle or little semicircle there. We've got a head here. And then another arm here. Okay. So before we do anything else, we just want to look at this and see how does this work? Is this going to work for us? Now, one thing that's a little bit tricky at this point is we have to remember that the lines that he uses here are going to be really thick, right? So he's painting these big, thick lines. So if we do this too small, it could give us some problems a little bit later on. So if you've done a little tiny figure in the middle, I would suggest taking this time just to erase and enlarge it, right? So that it will give you some space around all these shapes. Of course, we can kind of make some changes and additions, and we don't have to make these black outlines as thick in our version as we go here. But I think just kind of bearing that in mind will be helpful. And then let's draw we can even kind of make some of these wider outlines. In fact, you know what I'm going to do is actually create like a little bubble around here, just to help. We'll create one bubble there, or maybe I'll do this a little bit darker so that you can see. So here's kind of a little circle, and then I'm going to make another wider one here. Now, obviously, this is not how he would have done it. He was making artwork super fast. Like, he probably created this whole thing within, like, 30, 40 seconds or so, the speed that he was working at. But just for our sake, and I'm inventing where these things go, so you can make them longer or shorter. Like, he's got some that are maybe a little bit longer than others. And we could certainly do that, too. These are just like little placeholders for me. That one's a little bit wide. You can see they started really thin here, and as I'm going around, they're getting wider and wider. So I probably want to err on the thinner side of these. And then you see I've gotten to a point where, like, oh, there's kind of these are all nicely spaced, and then I get here and there's a little bit of a bigger gap, right? So that's okay. I can make some adjustments. That's what doing these drawings are for, right? Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start mixing some paint, and we're going to apply paint onto this surface here. So I'm going to move that canvas out of the way. And what paint do we need today? Well, this cool blue is probably going to be the color that we're going to use for the background. So I'll just squeeze that in here. We're going to need a little bit of white, so I'm going to squeeze some white into the center. And then to make this orange, what we're going to do is let's put some, because we may not even use all of the colors that we have here. So let's put a little bit of warm yellow. So there's no need to use all the colors if we're not going to paint with them all today. So because this Keith Haring used often a fairly limited color palette. So I think this will be enough for right now. Sorry, there's warm red, warm yellow, and cool blue. So we'll see what these colors, if we need more, we can always add different colors into our mixture here. And let's bring our picture back here. So, I need a little bit of tea. And I'm going to take a allergy medication. So my nose isn't not sniffling the whole time. Okay, so let's mix this blue that we're going to put onto the background. I'm just going to change this so we can see if we can match this as closely as possible. So what I'm going to do, let's scoop up some of this white, because that's what we want on our brush. I'm just going to get some of that into the bristles of my brush. And then let's start mixing a little bit of blue here. And look at that. How are we here? It's gonna pretty close. I mean, we could spend some time like really fiddling with this and trying to get a little bit you know, I feel like there could be a little tiny amount of cool yellow in here. If that's something, if you really want to nail that color really closely, then you could add a little bit of cool yellow in there, as opposed to not warm yellow, but cool yellow, just to kind of add a little infinitesimal element of turquoise into that image, because you could see how this is going a little bit more baby blue. In fact, here I'm saying like we could do this. Why don't we actually do it? We're gonna need a little drop of it. Come on. In fact, I'm just gonna, rather than even squeezing a bunch out here, I'm gonna add this to my shirt. Right? That's the cool thing about having a painting shirt, is you can just add color right on there. So let's see. We've got a little bit of this cool yellow. I'm just going to mix a tiny bit into here. Very little amount. We don't want to add too much, because otherwise it's going to go green, right? And how does, if we get closer here, might have a little bit too much white on here. Add a little more blue. You know, you could replace this background with a, you know, orange or purple. You know, there's no reason whatsoever that it has to stay this color. I am going to mix a little bit more, a bigger batch up here, just so I can cover the surface a little bit better. Now that I know what kind of color I need, I can do that. Okay, get a little bit more yellow here. It's a little bit dark. Okay. You know, I have talked in the past about about not being so worried about having a unified color for the background. So, but in this case, if we're really trying to do a something faithful to Keith Haring, we may want to get have a little bit more of a solid color, as opposed to, you know, Van Gogh, where we kind of like to have the background or any kind of solid areas of color having a little bit more variety. So one thing that's happening as I paint this, obviously there's the white in this paint is pretty much obliterating my original pencil lines that I drew on here. If you, but I can kind of see them. They're very, very subtle coming through. They're probably not even coming through on the camera. And it's not easy for me to see them even with my own naked eye. But the point is I kind of want them to disappear, right? Of course, I could spend some time kind of outlining and going around them, kind of like what I'm doing here with the figure. But I also think, like, once I've drawn it once, it's going to be easier for me to find it just kind of intuitively, because now that I've kind of placed it on there, I'm like, okay, I've seen where those lines go. I can probably get there again relatively quickly. I can see also, as this paint is drying, I can see those pencil lines coming back through too. So anyone who's worried about their beautiful underdrawing disappearing, the paint will usually get, as it starts to dry a little bit more transparent. You know, I'm just realizing, like, and I didn't really even see this until I see it now. You can see there's quite a difference between there's a lot more room here in the belly in my image than in his image. So a few different things we can do, one of which is just to keep on plowing forward, or I can wait for this to dry, add a little bit of white paint, or maybe we'll see how fast this dries. I'm going to use my brush just to kind of help accelerate the drawing by spreading that paint out a little bit. But I could even see if I could use, when I paint this orange on here, to adjust that as well. But, you know, it's up to you how faithful you want to be to the original. I'm personally not really obsessed with making 100% reproductions. I'm not in the forgery business, or I'm not going to be selling mine to collectors, and so if anything, a little bit of variety just adds my own personality into the mix. Another little thing here, it looks like there's an eyelash or something of mine here. So one thing I can do is try to just brush it out, which I've successfully done, and it disappeared. If it gets on your brush, just before you brush again, just try to brush it off so that it actually does leave your brush. If I noticed it like 20 minutes later, I would just leave it, let it sit there, let it dry, and then afterwards try to pick it off. Otherwise, you might find you could just get a bunch of fingernail scrapings in there, and it just becomes a bit of a mess. Okay, so got my first layer of paint in here. Just going to wash this brush off. Donna says, I wonder what happened to Michael. Is everything okay? I'm not sure what you mean, Donna. Is everything... It looks like everything's still playing okay. Can anybody else hear me, or... Oh, your computer froze. Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to mix the orange for the inside here for this baby. You know, I do think that because the way that I've drawn it, the torso of this figure is longer, and that makes the body appear to be an older person. So now this sort of looks more like an adult on their knees rather than a baby on their knees, right? Because as we grow, all of our body continues to grow as well, and particularly our torso, right? So, let me see how dry. A little tacky in there. So, but I'll let that dry for just a second. While that's doing that, let's mix the orange inside here. maybe I'm going to switch to just a slightly smaller brush. So that was the brush I used for the background. And this is the one that I'm going to use for the baby, or the inside of the figure. So it's another wide square brush. But I want to be able to get into some of these details without too much difficulty. So let's take some yellow here, the warm yellow, and a little bit of red. Let's mix this together. Okay, looking good. And I'm going to need a little bit more white, because this image is just slightly tinted. The color's not, it's not a super strong, bright, saturated colors, even though there's a slight pastel quality to it. So let's just take a little bit of white and mix it in here. So that tint just takes a little bit of the edge off of the brightness of this color. So I'm just adding a little bit more paint just to, so that I have more paint to do this figure with. I got a little bit more white back on there. Okay. I think that his painting might even have more white on. Let's just keep on adding a little more. I'm going to mix it just slightly off to the side here. Let's see. That might be too much, so I'll come back down here. Let's see. It's also going to be hard for you to judge how dark this color is until you put those black lines on here. So I look at that, and I think, you know what? It needs a little bit more red on here. So I'm just going to add a bit more red in here. That feels a bit better. So there's a little peachy kind of quality to this paint. And don't be afraid to go right up and even overlap on the black as well, or the blue, because we're going to put black lines on here to separate them, right? It's kind of like a stained glass window effect, really. I would also say that overlapping the paint just a little bit is also going to help that the brushability of that black paint when we start putting it on here. I don't know why I'm noodling around here, because I'm going to again cover it with paint, but so you can see what I'm trying to do here is just to widen that out a bit. But do you see how that previous layer of blue paint kind of shows through there? There's also a little bit of the pencil lines that I drew earlier kind of showing through. Now, probably ideally, for the purposes of this class, I tend to draw much darker just so that you can see all my lines on camera. But if I was doing this myself, I either would erase a lot of those lines or make them as light as possible so that they're not kind of impacting the drawing at all, or the painting. Okay, so that's good. Again, I probably could have put a little bit more white on there, but and that might, in fact, I'm going to do a little bit more white just to hide a little bit more of those pencil lines. So let's drop a little bit more white on here. Why not, right? Whoa, that's a lot. So let's get a little more yellow in here. A little bit more red. Whoa, that's too much red. Now this could cause this painting to take a little bit more time to dry, which means I am going to have a chance to work on another painting here out of just necessity. This is really covering that blue paint pretty well, so I'm going to go a little bit wild and go over top of that blue. Okay. And then I'm just brushing it out to see if I can get rid of any kind of brush strokes. Just a little bit wider. Okay. There we go. Looks good. So I'm going to set this aside for a few minutes, and while that dries, we'll work on the other painting. So speaking of which, here it is. Let's take a look here. I'm just going to clean this brush. That's a great point, Dutch AK-47. You're saying that this front, or the I guess would be the right arm, is actually technically right below the chin. So I'm going to take your advice here, and I will paint this, just enlarging this area. We'll see how all this works. This is, I've never painted a Keith Haring painting before myself. This is kind of exciting to try doing something a little bit different. Cool. Thank you for the comment. Okay. I washed this my painting shirt yesterday for the first time in a month, and it's shrunk a little bit, if you can see. Either that, or I've been eating too much of the leftover Halloween candy. Might be a little bit more of the Halloween candy. Okay, so I'm just looking at this canvas here. It's been drying for what, 20 minutes or so, and I did put the paint on pretty thick, so it's still a little bit wet here. What I'm doing is I'm just going over it with my finger. You can see where it was. I'm just brushing some of that, and I'm just, any kind of paint on the surface that is still wet, I'm kind of spreading it out, and that's going to help that paint dry just a little bit faster. This is what I do if I'm in a bit of a hurry. Now I can still see that it's reflective in certain places here, which again means it's still wet. Now I wouldn't do this to the finished painting. I wouldn't start rubbing the surface of a finished painting. But because this is our underpainting, it's less of a problem. So let me take a moment here to find the image for... okay, here we are. JK. let's just take a look at it together. Oops, it needs to be. Okay, so here's the other Keith Haring painting that I wanted to explore just while that other painting, the first one, is drying. Now this one's a different image altogether, and it's also a square format image. And I've got a rectangle. Uh-oh, what do I do? Am I out of luck? Of course not. We're going to make it work, and I'll show you how. So let's go to this view here. We're going to draw it out, and that's also going to allow this acrylic to do a little bit of extra drying here. There's a few little ridges there. You know, in an ideal world, what I would do is allow this to dry, and then I could sand it. But for our purpose, I'm just going to plow right ahead here. Okay, so one of the things, the features of this painting that I like a lot is that there's kind of a black outline around the edges. So I'm just going to quickly draw that. And it doesn't have to be perfect, because again, I'm going to paint over all of this. Now, a few different things. One of which is you could have black going right to the edge, or you could leave a little bit of a white edge and then have a black line around there. So I'm actually going to do the second there. I'm going to have a little bit of a black edge, or a white edge with a little black frame inside that. And, you know, I'm not using a ruler because he never used a ruler. His art was always kind of had this really wonderful hand-painted quality, so there's going to be this little black edge around there. Of course, I could just do this later on when I'm painting it, but, you know, for our purpose, when we're beginners, doing a little bit of this planning beforehand is just going to take a little bit of that guesswork out and help us feel a little bit more prepared. Okay, so this is the middle of the picture. I could also divide this in half, as I like to do, but since, you know, we have white on the background, I could also clean it up with more white paint. But in this case, let's see if we can go take a little bit of a step, and this is where the middle of the picture is. All right, so now the next thing I want to do is let's draw a heart in here. And basically from the middle to the bottom, it looks like about a quarter of the way down is the bottom of the heart. Right? And similarly, let's say this is the quarter of the way up, so halfway, quarter. I'm going to say around, just past this other quarter is the top of the heart here. Maybe even a little bit further down. So, and then you know, his artwork, I don't think he was really worried about symmetry. So you don't have to worry if it's a little bit wonky, your heart. Mine's a little bit, tiny bit wonky. I'm going to just draw this a little bit darker so it shows up on camera better. Okay, and let's draw these two figures here. So we've got one fellow over here and one fellow over here. Okay, so these are their torsos, their bodies. And then they've got their kind of heads right kind of inset into their body a bit. Okay. And then we've got, let's say I'm going to continue this. Or actually, let's go down here. Arm up. There's one hand. And then another one here. All right, if I want, I can make this head bigger. Okay, we got another hand, and these hands are touching. You can see there's a little bit of a space here where the bottom of that heart is. If you really want to try to make it perfect, one of the things that we will use in a future episode is graphite paper, and we can do some tracings using graphite paper and transfer an image that way. But in this case, I'm not too concerned. You can see this hand isn't touching the heart in the same way, so I'm going to kind of follow along with Keith Haring there. And in this case, instead of drawing these boxes, I'm just going to draw some lines here for myself. And this is going to be kind of where the center of these brush strokes are going to be. So here's this radiating heart. Okay. So there's my initial drawing on there. I hope it's dark enough for you to see. What I'm also going to do at this stage is I'm going to take my eraser and I'm just going to erase a little bit here before I start doing any painting, so that I can I won't have to worry so much about trying to cover these images, especially because if I've got if I'm painting over white paint, or I want white to show through, you know, it's going to make my life a little bit easier. I won't have to use so many coats of paint to hide any pencil lines. And not that you should worry about hiding your lines, right? There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I'm also going to go over some of these other lines here just to kind of lighten them up. Got my little line in the center. You can see early at the beginning of the episode, remember I dropped a little bit of water on there. That's the little mini stain that it left, but we're going to cover that up anyway. So. Okay. Now before I do anything else, I'm also going to take my sandpaper here. Let me just... I'm going to take this sandpaper and just give this just a tiny light sanding here. Now again, we'd want this to be dry for a few hours rather than the 30 minutes or so that we've had. So it may pull a little bit of the paint on here. We'll see. Oh yeah, much better. Much smoother surface, great. So again, there's that acrylic that's coming off. It leaves a little bit of a powdery residue. So I'm just going to take a cloth. You can, again, depending on how you're doing, you could wet the cloth to help get particles off. This is a dry cloth, and I'm just going to wipe it down with this dry cloth, which isn't as effective as a wet cloth, but I don't want this to be too wet of a surface because I'm about to paint on it right now. Okay, so this image, we need a heart right in the middle. Now, it looks like this is pretty close to just warm red right out of the tube. So I'm just going to take that warm red right out, and I'm going to paint it in here. If you're like, oh, I erased too much, okay, well then just draw your lines back in here a bit. Maybe not quite as dark. Okay. And let's just go to town here with this nice warm red. If you may find, so this is definitely why you do not want to use water while you're painting. because that water is going to thin the paint out and make it more transparent, and you're going to see more brush strokes. And this image we're working from, I think, well, he probably painted an original version, and then, but it looks like what we're seeing is a print. And printmaking is generally one of the qualities that is recognizable about it is those solid colors that do not have any brush strokes visible. And if you want that quality and you don't want to see the brush strokes, like you can see these little areas where there's a little bit of white showing through, right? We may need to do a second coat of this paint. This is cool. I've been such a huge fan of Keith Haring for so long. This is, again, another little dream of mine to you know, it's like having a conversation with an artist. You know, when you're looking at their work like this and trying to replicate it or do something inspired by them. This is how, like, it's the same sort of thing with musicians covering somebody else's music. You learn a lot about them. Like it sort of transports me anyway to being maybe not necessarily in their head, but it helps me appreciate their process a little bit more. And this is certainly not the way that this is not like any kind of painting that I make on my own, but once you do something like this, you're like, huh, interesting. Well, maybe I could do something like this. Why not, right? Like, what's to stop me from making a few paintings like this in the future? Like, not using his style, but the same sort of approach with these bold outlines and flat colors and okay. So we'll have to see how this dries. I'm going to set this aside for a good 10-20 minutes while I work on the other painting. And I may even need to put a little more red on there afterwards, but we'll see. I have a feeling that as it dries, we might see a little bit of the brush strokes coming by. Okay. So I'm just going to wipe off my brush here. Give it a nice little clean. You can see what I do is I like to get as much paint off my brush before I put it into the water so that I don't contaminate the water so much. That way I'm not having to clean my water every 10 minutes. You know, when I teach classes in person, there's some people that are every few minutes they're getting up and cleaning the water and pouring all this water up and down the sink and filling up their cups, and they're sort of like, oh, what's going on? Whereas, you know, just cleaning your brush off, first of all, allows the water to stay clean longer. It's also helping to prevent all of the paint that's on your brush from going down into the sink, and quite often that dirty water just goes right out into the ocean, and then it's like goes into the fish that you eat and or drinking water. And you know, as much as we have technology that cleans the water, you know, it's who knows how effective it is at times, and I'd rather not pour a bunch of chemicals down the sink if I can avoid it. Okay. So, let's come back to this painting. What's nice about working like this and putting a painting aside is it's almost like we've seen the paint dry a little bit. And look what has happened here. As the paint dries, this blue has come through. And it shouldn't be surprising to us because we've done a number of paintings where we've done these washes of paint over top of the surface, and that in precisely to get these types of effects where one color is sort of optically mixing. And when I say optically mixing, I mean it's mixing in our eyes rather than in the paint itself, right? Because to get this color that we've got here is actually would be a really difficult color to mix. Like there's a, if I was to try to mix that color, I don't even know, I would use, it would be like this same tinted orange, but I'd probably put a little bit of, it's almost like a gray happening in here, right? Because of the way the blue is interacting here. So it's, I would probably put a little bit of this blue in there and maybe a little bit of black to turn it into a gray. Anyway, I just, those kind of things I think are really interesting. Now again, the paint is still a little bit wet. So in order to help it speed up, I could use a hair dryer, but I'm just going to use my finger because the edges is where I'm going to paint black paint over right now. The stuff in the center I'm not too concerned about. I can always paint over that later on, or even this area here, I'm going to put black down, but if there's a little bit of this under blue showing through, I can always touch that up afterwards. So let's get some black paint out. And this will probably be one of the only classes in which I use straight black right out of the tube. You may be, you know, if you've got a little bit of like blue left over, you may be like, well, you know what, maybe let's put a little bit of blue into the black. You could. There's nothing that would be wrong about that. Okay. The next thing I want to do is I want to find a brush that's going to work well for this particular exercise. If we look at, let's get to the previous Keith Haring here. If we look at this image, the black outline is a consistent black line, right? It's not getting thicker or thinner. It's not modulating in any way like maybe a calligraphy pen might, right? You know, if you use like a calligraphy pen, you might have some areas that are big and wide and then get really thin and then wide again. In Keith Haring's paintings, you know, it's an iconic part of the painting where everything is the same thickness. And that goes to him using a white piece of chalk on black in the subway, as well as he would often use, do I have any here? He would use like, what do they call them? Like paint pens. And this is also a graffiti artist's tool, which is, it's a pen that I have them over here, but I can't go, I'd have to unplug my microphone again. But they look like big, thick Sharpies. And instead of ink coming out of them, paint comes out of them. And you can get acrylic-based paint pens or oil-based paint pens. And of course, you know, graffiti artists will use these things, and you kind of, you know what they look like? They remind me of those metallic pens that you kind of shake a bunch, and you hear that, and then you take the cap off, and often there's like a really strong smell. They're like that, but they just have a wide tip. Anyway, I don't know even, but that's why these brushstrokes have that quality of, you know, these thick black lines. Anyway, let's attack this with some, again, I'm using a square brush. You could use a round brush, one of these types of brushes. So, but you just may find if you use this type of a brush that the line's going to get wider and thinner all the time, and it could be a little bit of a pain to kind of make it work. So, these types of paintings look really easy, but then once you're like at this stage, you're like, whew, there's only two colors here, and I'm putting black on. Whew, like we are, you know, there's only two ways this can go, right? So it sometimes feels pretty intense to start doing this. Now I want to make sure this is relatively dry because I'm going to rest my hand on here. If you, one strategy that you can use would be to put a piece of paper down in certain places so I can rest my hand on there without fear of moving anything around. And then if I peel this off, you can see, look at that. It's hard to see, but a little bit of paint came off. All right, so I'd rather that came off on the paper than got onto my hand, and then I start stamping and smudging it all over the place. Okay. So let's start here. You can take your time doing this kind of thing. There's no hurry, and we'll see how good I do. All right. Again, he would have done this probably in a number of really fast brush strokes, because he could do this kind of stuff in his sleep. Me, not so much. Okay. So you see I'm kind of going a little bit wider than this. I want to keep as much of the orange intact as possible. And you also kind of want to be careful about going over your lines too much, because every time you go over the lines, they, like I did here, they start getting thicker and thicker. I would also say I'm going to go over the whole thing and then start going back and cleaning anything up, because I want to make sure the whole thing works, because I might need to bring the black line towards the center or move it outwards depending on how things go. So again, to help bridge this gap, I'm going to move, instead of the line going right in the middle, I'm going to come pretty close to the edge here. Yay. Okay, let's see here. I'm going to put this line right here. And it's going to be here. I'm sure there's probably a few of you just sitting here just watching me do it and be like, okay, I'm going to see what Michael does before I even start painting. See if he makes any mistakes, and then how he solves those problems before I start. Which might be a good idea, because I know a few of you watch these episodes before you make your paintings too, so I'm also going to bring this line up a little bit higher. There we go. I think this line's going to come up higher, like that. Okay. Let's turn this ever so maybe onto its side. Okay, actually, before I do that, it's almost like what I'm doing right now is I want to sort of practice this line. This line's going to come right to here. if I get in a little tricky spot here, I'm actually going to use the side of my brush just to kind of really quickly draw in. All right, that's where I want to be. Okay. So you can see here, there's a little bit of that blue showing through. I don't even know if I mind it so much. I could touch it up, but let's just see. You know, what we're painting here is we've got these complementary colors, blue and orange, side by side like that, and it kind of creates it creates a bit of an optical illusion that, for me anyway, it makes my eyes grow a little bit crossed. Like, yeah, it's like looking at this canvas while I'm painting it is not easy. It's like my eyes are because the paint is literally causing the rods and cones in my eyes to vibrate as they're trying to observe in this image. Okay, I'm just gonna right here give a little bit of a pointier edge. So I'm just taking my brush and just kind of poking it up there a little bit. And I've got this little thing here with the foot that I'm going to fix. So I'm like taking my brush, and it's like I'm just needling it out a little bit to I'm not super happy with what happened here with the foot, but okay. Another thing that I'm looking at this and I see it's all wet right now, but there's a few parts where the paint skipped over some of the weave of the canvas. So I might have to go in there and just fill it in a little bit. If you want, again, there's no reason why you need to do it. But if you really want that super solid look that he used, you might want to just clean that up a little bit. Let me see. I've got, before this paint on my palette is completely dry, this could be a nightmare, but let's just see if I can just paint this over just a little bit. It helps. It's always you kind of open yourself up to a potential disaster if this paint was slightly different color. And we'll see as it dries, it could also still change on me a bit, but I think that's pretty good. Okay, so the last step on this painting here is going to be just to draw those radiating beams coming out. And I don't know if you can see it, but I can certainly see it. Remember I was saying this, as it dries, I should be able to start seeing those beams coming through again. Okay, so I'm going to paint those. Get my black here. let's just take a look at this red. You can see I put a pretty thick coat on there, and there's still a few places where it's still drying. But there'll be plenty of time to work on that here in a second. So let's start putting some of these beams, radiating beams coming out of here. So what I'm doing is I kind of start, and then I want to try to lift off to get a clean end. If I don't want to kind of push down and spread the bristles out too much. I have a few that are a little bit longer than others. It looks like he's sort of alternating between long and short, right? But you don't have to. Let me see. Let's make this a little bit smaller. You know, again, his canvas was a little bit more square than mine. It wasn't not a perfect square, but mine's a little bit more rectangular. So I got to kind of fill these edges in a little bit more. Okay, I'm just gonna keep, you know, our arms kind of, our body kind of wants with our arms to do this movement, this kind of arcing movement. So rather than trying to fight that, because it can be really awkward to try to do, just like, why not just turn the canvas and find kind of a little bit more comfortable way of doing it. Now as I do this, if I paint, I have my original lines here, but I feel like it's going to create a little bit of a gap just the way, so I'm just going to move this next brush stroke in a bit. We'll see as we get closer. You know, when I get a little bit closer to here, then I can kind of judge how, how I'm going to put those brush strokes there, but let's go back to this original here. So this type of painting is when having a nice gessoed canvas really helps, because it really makes this paint go on nice and fluid, and it just makes for a more pleasurable painting experience. So I'm also just touching up some of the edges here a little bit. I'm also doing my best to load the brush up each time I paint here so that each brush stroke is as close to the same sort of density of paint as the previous. Okay, so as I said, once I get to this point, I'm just going to take a quick look and see, okay, how many more brush strokes can I put in here? right? Because I don't want to have one weird one where they're really crammed together. So let's get a few more in here and we'll see pretty quickly. I think I got 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3 in here. Might need to be a little bit closer. So 1 and 2 here. Because you kind of want to hide, you don't want people necessarily to know where you began and ended these beams, right? And often, you see, that was a little bit nuts. Yeah, you see, they're not quite as evenly spread out as I would like, but now I look at his and I see that his weren't either, right? So that gives me some comfort. I think I'm going to make some of these just a little bit longer. And this one I'm going to make a little bit wider. Uh-oh, you see, once you start widening things, changing things, things start getting a little bit wonky. Okay, there were a few of these that just need a quick little touch up. Add a little squarish. Square that end up here. Maybe I need... If you're finding these classes helpful, I certainly would appreciate you liking and subscribing to the channel. It also helps you to find out when the next episode is and how to, when it is a Tuesday or Thursday, you could just look in your notifications on YouTube and just instantly pops up, and you can just navigate directly to it without having to do any searching. Hit the notification bell. That certainly helps as well. You can make a small or large contribution via PayPal. There's the link in the video description below. There's also a recent addition to the channel is what's called Super Chat, which is a way for you to contribute money directly during a live stream. And the Super Chat is a function on where you can comment, like right above on the bottom where you can comment during the live stream. There's a little $sign, potentially, depending if you've linked your credit card up to Google. And then that way you can put a small or large amount through there. And people have used that in the past. And that's, I am blessed by so many people who've been contributing even just small amounts, like the price of a cup of coffee. Some of the stuff we're doing here is exactly what I do in my university classes that I teach. So you're getting a free art school education here. But I know not everybody's got money to spare, especially in these tough times. So even just sharing a link on your Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, posting the image you made and tagging me in it so that people can find me, and wouldn't it be great the more and more people who are painting and learning how to paint and expressing themselves in positive ways rather than blowing things up or committing violence towards one another. We're using painting as their way of expressing themselves. Okay. So, that feels pretty good. You know, it's not the, it's, when I look at it up close, it looks a little bit wonky, and some of these lines are a little sloppy, but I have to remember that most people aren't going to look at it this close. If I hang this on my wall, the closest people are going to ever really look at it might be arm's length, right? And in that sense, they're going to be more than happy to see it, you know, as it is right now. So I feel pretty good about that. Even that little touch up, you know, I still see a bit of that showing through. I still see some of the pencil lines I drew in a few places showing through. But I also am not, I'm not bothered by that. In fact, as an artist, I kind of like it when artists kind of give us a little clue to what was there before. Okay, so how about where can I put this to dry temporarily without getting, I was wanting to put it in the background, but there's things there. Okay, so let's finish this one off. Again, some of this red is still a little bit wet, but we're only going to be painting really on black on these outside edges, so we can certainly tackle the rest of this painting right now. Jesse says, I noticed the black lines take the shape of the baby. I'm not sure I know what you mean. Like, you mean that they kind of echo the shape of the baby? You know, you could maybe go in a little bit more rather than kind of I've got a little bit more of a circle than his, right? He may have kind of come in a little bit closer to the body there, whereas mine is a little bit more of a cleaner circle. Yeah, okay. So, let's go to this next painting here. And let's finish this one off. Okay. Get my black brush set up here. I did just wash it from the previous painting just to, you know, sometimes the paint starts to build up inside, and when it does that, when you've got paint that gets kind of clogged up inside of the bristles, it'll also just make the painting process a little bit more clumsy and a little more difficult. So by washing it, it kind of helps keep a nice fresh brush. Okay, let's load it up with some black paint, and let's continue this effort. This is also why you don't want to put a ton of paint on here, because if I put a big glob of black paint and I start painting, that black paint is going to dry, and by the end of the painting, it's the consistency of the paint is going to be different than when I first squeezed it out of the tube, right? So you always want to be trying to use as little paint on and exposing that to air as possible, so that you're not trying to spread dried or semi-dried paint around on the surface. Okay, so let's go back to this here. Just moving that. Okay, there we go. So, where should we start this one? Good question, Michael. I think, obviously, there's this black border. That's going to be probably one of the last things that I do. Unless I had a lot of time, what would be nice, I could do that black border and then let it dry, but I don't want that black border while I'm painting, then accidentally rubbing my hand all over it and causing myself a bit of a nightmare. So, the other thing is, you know, I'm right-handed, so it's for me sometimes makes sense to kind of work left to right so that I can paint this way and then come back, and that way, again, my hand isn't, if I've painted here, then it's going to be a little tricky to get to this part. So I'm going to do that very same thing. Now, obviously, he's got the border coming right up to this elbow, but I've got a little extra space, so I'm not worried about that here. So, where should we begin, Michael? Let's start with this hand up here. Oh, I got a little bit of a blob there, but went a little wider than my black line went a little wider than I'd hoped. So I'm just going to clean that up a little bit. But again, I'm not going to spend too much time there because I might have to do other cleaning in other places here. So I'm just going to quickly outline for myself. The head goes here. This one feels a little bit trickier because I've only got that one layer of white paint over it, and I can really see the difference between painting on a canvas that's just got one layer of paint versus gesso and a layer of paint, right? This is a little bit rougher textured surface than I'd been using previously. This is pretty tricky to get into some of these details here. This is also personally why I like painting on a flat surface rather than on an easel. And that's probably just because my original background in art is as a drawer and illustrator, and I've just always been more comfortable standing, like, because generally when you're drawing, you're kind of sitting down looking at your sketchbook or whatever rather than standing up. And so that's just my I got a little bit wider there than I was hoping, but and so this part, there might be just a bare little bit of the edge of that, the bottom of that heart showing through when we're all said and done. But and maybe none of it shows up. That's okay too. I don't know if you can hear upstairs, but our daughter, who's, gosh, it's almost 15 months old, is on the verge any day now of walking, and walking on her own. She can walk and she can stand on her own, but she's a little bit shy about doing it. You know, she's not aware that sometimes she finds herself just like the other day, she found herself standing in the middle of the room without holding on to anything, and sudden panic setting in. But we're all pretty excited about her taking that next little leap, so you might hear my wife upstairs there kind of encouraging her, and exclamations of glee and excitement, because it's a big day. Big day for her, big day for... Oops, okay. Getting a little sloppy here. So if this happens, that's okay. If it's not too wide, I can just kind of clean it up by going over my line a little bit here. Whoa, this guy's head is getting real thick, isn't it? And, you know, I guess as I just said, that this guy, and thinking about this being a gendered kind of thing, I think one thing that's nice about Keith Haring's artwork is the kind of the non-gendered quality of these characters. They could be men, but he makes no differentiation between men and women in his artwork. And there's that kind of anonymity or interchangeability of the figures allows every person who looks at it to kind of pour themselves into the image, and that's another way it has this sort of iconic qualities. That this could be a man and a woman falling in love. It could be two men or two women, or people who haven't declared their gender, right? Or transitioning from one to the other, which I think is nice. I think living in a world where people are able to choose who they want to be and who they fall in love with is, I think that's great. It certainly has no impact on my life whatsoever, so whatever people want to do that brings them happiness, as long as it doesn't hurt me, I'm all for it. Where I teach at Emily Carr University here in Vancouver, well, when we were teaching, when the building was open to the public and to students, we now have gender-neutral bathrooms, and it's always kind of fun to see, people coming in, because there's often people visiting the school with their parents, and I like to sit in the cafeteria and just watch as parents come in and they stand at the bathroom trying to figure out what to do. It cracks me up. It's a different world. Okay, see, I just made another boo-boo here. This might be something I'm going to need to use some paint to cover up, because I don't know if I can widen this convincingly. Ay. Oh, maybe okay. A little bit thicker. Then some of these lines, then it's nice when they're kind of a more consistent level, but to do this with a brush is pretty tricky to get nice consistent widths of lines. So, and my paint is drying a little bit. I'm just adding a little bit of water to it, not a lot, because I don't want this paint to get thin and get semi-transparent. Okay, so now the next thing I'm going to do is let's paint around the heart, I think is what I'll do next. So the question in my mind is, do I want any of this red to show up or not? If I do, then I'm going to have to, this brush stroke is going to have to come down here, and it'll have to continue up here. So, I think, well, let me just take, I'm looking at the original again. Let's paint this here. And that means this would come down here. And Tigre Rouge Blitz says, don't forget, people forget you can love friends too, which is great too. Yes, of course, this doesn't have to be a romantic relationship. These people are celebrating their friendship too, right? Making a painting like this and then giving it to a friend for a birthday present, or we got Christmas coming up and Kwanzaa and Hanukkah and whatever else out there, would be a lovely gesture, wouldn't it? I mean, all of these paintings, you can see how we're making these in a couple of hours where we can produce one of these things. And, you know, if somebody comes over to your house and is like, hey, that's a really cool painting, well done, like, you know, I might be like, oh, you know what, I could give them this painting that I made. They might be really happy with that. And if I want, I could always make another one. And the second one I make could be even better. Or I could use this as an opportunity to make the second painting, and afterwards I'll choose whichever the better one is. That's the one I'll give away. See also that Tigre Rouge Blitz says, thanks for painting, embracing the new live medium. I always come back to reference your vids. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, they're definitely longer episodes. When I first started this, I was like, you know, they'll make these like 45-minute ones. And, you know, it's like, well, why? Like, what's the hurry? You know, if people want to watch the whole thing, then they have the whole thing. If they want to skip ahead, my plan is to edit these down and keep the originals, but also have like a, you know, 10-minute version or 5-minute version for people who are maybe a little who want, you know, a quick little snack, and if they want to go back and watch the whole thing and paint along with me, then they can sit down for the main course and join us just as you guys are joining me right now. But, you know, I think, you know, because I was thinking, well, you know, I'll just film this and edit it, and it's like, well, why not just actually film it live, and then I'll have that, I'll be able to, people, if they want to paint along with me live, they'll have that experience, and then it's always recorded, and other people who can't watch later on can watch the recorded version. It's interesting to me how many people, you know, watch the recorded. There's way more people watch the recorded versions than watch the live. You know, when we're doing these live, there's, you know, 25 people, 30 people, and then a week later there's a couple hundred views on. So, okay, so that's turning out pretty cool. Now, what I want to do is, we've got these little radiating beams. I want to paint those and my outline. So, what order do I want to do this? In this side of the... you know what? Let's... I was gonna sometimes I just get obsessed with, like, little details. Okay, how should we do this now? I'm going to have to be rotating the canvas around to get at different things anyway. I think what I'm going to do, I want to be kind of conscious that I leave white space between these brushstrokes and my outline. So I might even I might start some of these and then have to extend them later on as I paint them, but we'll see. So I need some more black paint. Okay. Load my brush up. And I don't want too much paint getting built up on the edge. So that's why I'm rubbing it off on the side there. Jen McCauley says, nice work. My wife up says, sorry we're loud. She's walking and she's on a roll. Cool. That's so exciting. Can't wait to come up and see. One thing that's nice about this whole working from home thing is the commute is very short. After I'm done, you know, I taught this morning my university courses, and then during break I can just walk upstairs and make a cup of tea and hang out with the family and then go back to work. And whereas previously I'd be just gone all day long and come home and missed so much. And okay, just noticing, you know, here there's more space than I've done here, so I'm getting a little close to the heart, which is okay because there's less space up here. But I'm just doing a little mental note to myself to let's spread back out, and if I need to kind of get closer again, I can do that. He, however, looks like he stayed pretty even throughout, so I might extend these lines here, but we'll see once I turn it back around how that turned out. I'm being pretty slow while I'm doing this, right? I mean, I could certainly dash this off way faster than I'm doing right now. I'm being a little bit, maybe overly cautious. And to be honest, sometimes going slow like this can make it more difficult than if I was doing big, fast brush strokes. Okay, so I'm looking at that. Yeah, I do think I'm going to bring some of these lines in here. So you can see how I'm kind of extending them a little bit this way. Okay. There is a few obviously inside here, but the way that I've painted it, I don't know if they'll fit. Might be, I could fit maybe a little one in here, but I'm going to think about it. I'm going to think about that. I'm going to do the outside border, and then we'll come back to that part. Although that's going to be, well, I can reach in there and do that. So let's do this border. Doing these longer lines is a little bit trickier than doing the short lines, because it's harder to kind of draw a long straight line than it is to draw a short straight line, because you got, you know, bigger gap to bridge. Just going to add a tiny bit of water, not much, just like I literally dipped my brush in briefly. A little bit of a wobbly line there. Okay. Oh, so you got a little bit wider there, but maybe that's the heart. It's pounding and pulsing and making the border kind of swell and lose its shape, because there's just so much love that can't be contained. As an artist, sometimes you gotta justify some of your marks and mistakes so that you can live with them. Okay. Almost done here. I really appreciate all the support over these many months that you guys have. The channel's growing, the numbers are going up, more and more people are watching the videos. That is makes me feel really happy that more and more people want to use their spare time to make art and learn new skills. It fills me with hope in the world that we're trending in the right direction. Sometimes it doesn't always feel that way. You know, regardless of how you feel about the election, American election just recently, you know, I think some people feel like the sky's falling. I'm just going to put this line down here. I think we're ultimately in a better place than we were at really any time in the past. Let's put another little dot here. Do I want to put one down here? don't know. I'm going to think about it. I don't know. I think that's okay. I think I can live with this painting like it is there. Okay. So I'm going to set this aside for just a second, and I'm going to assign the other painting. So we've got these two here. Let's just take a look at these side by side here. Look at that. Two Keith Haring paintings, and I got a little blop of black on the bottom here with my thumb or something. I don't know where that came from, but I can easily touch that up. So let's move this to the side. Anything that's white always tends to get paint on it, doesn't it? Oops, I want the other painting below it here. So, my name. Don't put my name down on your painting. November 9th, 2020. After Keith Haring's there's one, and then the other here. Get careful, there's not paint all over. But even if I did get a little bit of paint on there, I don't even need to necessarily cover it. There's a little bit of some pencil lines there that I can either erase, or, you know what, let's just, I'll do a little tiny touch up here. Do I have any white left on here? Don't have any white, so I'll just take it right out of the tube. This is what I often will do. Squeeze a little bit of paint right onto the brush. It's also important to use, if you're going to do this, ideally use the same paint that you were using before, right? So I wouldn't want to use a different white that I put on the bottom. There we go. Any little touch-ups that I need? I can go around here, and I could really clean this up if I was really wanting. In fact, this area here, I was saying that my little mistake, I can just, oh, my hand is wobbling a little bit as I do this. Reaching over the middle of the picture, which is not a bright idea to begin with, because I could drag some paint right over the center of the picture here. Coolness. Painting into the water to dry. Two finished Keith Haring paintings. Wow, what a dream come true. Makes me so excited to see that. Let's bring these down here. Wow. The other day, I was like, kind of late at night, I have this, this stack of paintings. This one right Here, look at all the paintings that we've made in this past, what is this, episode 18, so like a couple of months we've been at this. Look at all that art. This is like super satisfying. Anyway, I had them all here, and I'm kind of flipping through them. Of course, I knock over water, all this chaos. I got water on some of them, and I'm drying them off. And acrylic paint, sometimes when you get water on it, can reactivate that paint. And if you're not careful, you could start wiping it away and smudging the paint. So just a little heads up that maybe putting one of these paintings in your bathroom may not be the best idea. If you're one of those persons who likes to take really long, hot showers, you could find the paints could kind of come down a little bit unless you cover it with maybe something like a matte medium, right? Or a glossy medium if you want the shiny quality coming through. Okay, folks. What else do I want to say before we sign off here? Oh, I do. Today's episode 18. I'm going to make a special episode between episode 20 and 21. So in a week from now, where I'm going to look at all of I'm just going to spend the entire episode looking at the artwork that you guys have sent in and giving you guys feedback on that. It probably won't be on a Tuesday or Thursday. It might just be on a Wednesday or Friday or Saturday in the middle of the night, and I'll film it and I'll do a live stream of it if anybody happens to be up. Just so that I can dedicate an hour or more to talking about your artwork. So if you want feedback on your paintings, the paintings that we've made together, send them to me ASAP. There's my Facebook, Instagram, Twitter down below. You can send me direct messages or post it and tag me on it. I know some people have already done that a little bit. I've been a little preoccupied over the past week. I haven't had a chance to look at some of your messages because they've piled up, but that's my plan this evening to get back to people. So I do really appreciate. I read every message, just not necessarily as the minute they're sent in. So I would love to see the work that you guys have done. In many cases, you guys have exceeded me, which makes me really excited because that's the goal of any teacher, is for the student to exceed the teacher, and that means that I'm doing a good job, right? So I really appreciate seeing your work, and it also, because sometimes it feels like I'm just talking to this black box, and I could be in an asylum somewhere talking to myself, and the guards are like, yeah, he's doing one of his live streams again. So seeing the work is possible validation that I'm not in a rubber room right now. Just before I go, just checking out some of the comments here. Deborah says, thank you for teaching us. Raising my kids took all of my time. Now, as a grandmother with time, I can explore my artistic abilities. I share your links. I cannot give you money, but I can get the word out. Oh, that's so special. Thank you, Deborah, for saying so. Oh, do not put the painting in the bathroom. Gail says, I wasn't that excited about tonight's painting, but I had so much fun, and I love the result. Deborah says, wonderful job. I've learned so much. Thank you, everyone. These comments make me so happy. It makes me feel like I'm using my time constructively. If just one person gets something out of all of this, it feels really good. It feels like I'm helping to brighten the world and add a little bit more color out there. So thank you so much for sharing all those positive comments. Yeah, subscribe to the channel. If you want to make a donation, the links are below. Please send me your work. I can't wait to see it. We will see you on Thursday. What are we doing on Thursday? Just take a quick look. Oh, we're painting Mary Cassatt's Woman Holding a Fan. So we're going to do something totally different. We're going to go from pop art to Impressionism. Mary Cassatt, one of the leading figures of the Impressionist art movement, one of the only women that was allowed in this big boys club, a fantastic artist, and she will be somebody that I'm really excited to make that painting. It's one of my favorites of hers, and I think probably the most accessible one for a beginner artist to paint. So we will see you guys on Thursday. Have yourself a wonderful rest of the evening, and until then, bye-bye, everybody.